Teachers of Reddit, what the worst thing that happened on a school trip? My boyfriend was a teacher and his students went on the annual DC trip. It was like 2 kids to each hotel room or something, and there was 2 14 years old boys that shared a room. One of the boys jacked off into a pillow and then hit the other kid in the face with a cum pillow. Asked my students to be respectful of other pedestrians while on the trip, because some people want to enjoy the nature center by themselves. One kid saw a woman with her service dog and tried to pull on it because mommy would let me have it. We had to leave because of that, and he ruined the entire trip for everyone. Former assistant teacher here. We were on a 6th grade field trip to the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. Cool place. So, at the time, one of the attractions was a sort of centripetal force machine that you can sit in and get swung around. Poor explanation, but imagine the Gravitron, only smaller and faster with seats and no walls. I googled it but can't find the ride. Guessing it was swapped out for something else. Well, one dumbass kid thought it'd be funny to show off and see what happens when you undo your seatbelt while riding. Naturally, he got flung out of the machine at roughly half the speed of sound and broke his fall with nothing but his face. Glasses busted. Massive concussion. Totally wrecked. There was a whole investigation and the teacher in charge of that kid's group had to actually defend himself from accusations that he could have somehow stopped that level of stupidity. Sadly, I didn't witness it but did hear the impact from one room over. Pretty interesting day. Kids were going to a conference for a leadership service oriented club. They got brought home early because a chaperone found an orgy in one of the rooms that had been pre-planned in a group chat that almost all of the kids on the trip were in. That was a shitstorm. I was a new teacher when the whole grade went on a field trip during the first week of school. In fact, I was so new that nobody, not even my colleagues, noticed that I wasn't on the bus. So it left without me. Fortunately, the destination was only about 15 minutes away, so it wasn't a big deal for me to jump in my car and follow the bus there. Close bracket. I took 3 classes of 6th graders, age 11-12, to visit the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. We'd come from about an hour and a half away, the kids and other teachers on buses. But since I was hugely pregnant, I was allowed to drive my own car. It had been raining, but I arrived a bit ahead of the bus. So when the kids got off, I was there to lead them to the museum. As I began walking towards the kids getting off the buses, I noticed a lot of papers on the sidewalk, and suddenly realized that they were an assortment of extremely pornographic pictures. I stopped to try to gather them up before the kids got an unexpected and completely inappropriate sex ed lesson. We'd already had a big talk about being mature when viewing classical art, e.g. nude statues. OMG, but we were not prepared for the most lurid porn LA had to offer. Unfortunately, the rain had plastered the papers to the sidewalk, and the sight of the very pregnant teacher scrambling on hands and knees on Wilshire Boulevard sent the chaperones and teachers rushing to my aid, with 100 kids right after them. No matter how urgently I tried to wave them back, it was memorable. I went on a class trip as chaperone to a science center. I was in charge of a group of 8 boys. One of them goes missing. I ask the others where he went, and they don't know either. He's missing for about 10 minutes until a security guard from the center comes up to me with him. The guy asks, "Is he one of yours?" And tells this kid to open his backpack when I say yes. Probably $200 worth of stolen stuff in there. He spent the rest of the trip right next to me. I am a teacher, but my anecdote comes from when I was a kid back in the mid-90s. We were visiting some museum in London and were traveling on the train and the tube with teachers. On the way back, some students didn't get on the tube before the automatic doors shut, and the teacher in charge just yelled as loud as he could, "See you back at school, lads." Double quote. And we just went home, and the teacher waited at the school later on, and sure enough, about 40 minutes after everyone else got back, the remaining kids turned up. If that happened to me now as a teacher in 2019, I'd be fired. Probably out of a cannon into an abyss marked RIP career. Unrelated to the question but related to this anecdote. Back in 2009, I went to Obama's inauguration with my parents. Friend at the time. And business law elective teacher. The teacher was this great, excitable guy I'm still pretty close to, absolutely one of my favorite high school teachers. Anyway, my dad and my friend got off the metro at a stop that was about 3 mishandlings away from a human crush. And my mom and my teacher and I got whisked off to God knows where a few stops down. We had brought walkie-talkies with us and managed to find each other again after a little while. But that was a crazy fun day. You know how it goes. 2 or 3 go missing and suddenly you're irresponsible and criminally liable. I don't know why anyone would get into the profession. The first time I went on a field trip with my youth group kids, we went to an indoor rock climbing place and one of the kids hid in the boys' bathroom, and since all the teachers were girls we had no idea where he was for a solid 20 minutes. Finally a staff member at the place used the bathroom and brought my missing kid out and said, "Is the one you missing?" The kid thought it was freaking hilarious, but I was 2 seconds away from calling the police. When I was in the AmeriCorps, I was a tutor at a school where a popular 7th grader drowned on the class's end of the year field trip to a lake at a state park the summer before I started. There were no lifeguards on duty. He was in chest deep water when he went under in the lake and never came up. His friends and the chaperones tried to find him, but by the time they did, it was too late. This was an underserved school in a really rough neighborhood. According to the teachers, things were getting better at the school. But this really fricked with the kids. It was a very challenging year for them. It happened right before we would enter the bus. My students had been waiting for a few minutes and some guys were messing around. I warned them to act normal but left them out of my sight for 1 minute to grab something from my post box. That time they pressed the fire alarm. The whole school, 1,650 students, had to be evacuated to the car park where the bus also waited. It was not my favorite morning. A girl on a beta club trip thought it would be funny to put a bomb on board in the window of the bus. The interstate was shut down. The bus was pulled over and SWAT team raided the bus. The bomb squad was called in to sweep the bus even though the girl admitted it was a hoax. She didn't go to jail somehow. She was also a popular cheerleader and didn't get any disciplinary action from the school. I'm an English teacher in Korea and field trips are different here. Usually, there are no additional chaperones. The teacher is responsible for all 25-ish students in their homeroom class during the trip. That means a field trip is often 8 classes of 25 students, 200 kids, and a maximum of 10 chaperones if some office staff get taken along. One of my first trips was to a large traditional market. It's a popular place to go and there are usually thousands of people there at all times. Our buses arrived and we all piled off in the parking lot. The kids were told via megaphone, "Be back here in 1 hour. Go." And all 200 of them scattered into the crowds and tents while most of the teachers got back onto the buses to have coffee. Surprisingly, 99% of the kids were back on the buses when they were supposed to be. However, a good number had bought small hamsters, turtles, or goldfish. 2 weeks later I couldn't find a single kid whose spontaneous pet was still alive. Not a teacher, but I witnessed the worst things kids could do during a school trip. My classmates and I were chill people. We didn't cause that much trouble. The worst things we could do were smoking a few joints and drinking some alcohol. Nobody got hurt and teachers actually loved taking our class out for trips. During one trip we were not the only students in the hotel. There was another group of younger students from a different city. We didn't even try to socialize with them because they were too loud and obnoxious. During the first night they literally destroyed the hotel. They broke a few doors and windows, smoked in the room setting all the alarms off, went in an authorized personnel only area of the hotel setting an even louder alarm off, and took hard drugs. The morning after we saw their teachers in the hall and they were trying to blame our class for all the damage. That was around 30,000 if I remember correctly, but the security cameras proved that we were innocent. They were kicked out of the hotel immediately after that, and I still have no idea why nobody called the police, since there was a lot of footage showing 14-year-old kids doing cocaine in the hallways. Group trip to take a tour of a college campus. We had a young man jump out of a bus window while it was going down the highway. His long-term girlfriend had broken up with him a few days before, and he later explained that he didn't see the point of going on the college visit anymore because he didn't want to go to the same college as her, or even apply to the same ones. Denied up and down that it was a suicide attempt. His friends circled the wagons and supported his story, and the story rumors died quickly. He got some gnarly road rash, but avoided being hit by any cars. I always got the impression that it was, in fact, a suicide attempt. If he didn't want to go on the tour, why go at all? Why board the bus? He could have stayed at school. This was several years ago. He is fine. Banned trip to Disney World. Lead bus driver knew a shortcut. This led to 5 large motorcoaches lost in an orange grove somewhere near Orlando. No idea how much damage we did to those trees. The roads really weren't designed for huge buses. I wasn't a teacher, but I was a junior counselor at a summer day camp, which basically meant I was still a kid myself at the upper age limit for the camp, 13, and L attended for free in exchange for helping the real counselors with the younger kids. Mostly we did nothing and had no real authority. But when it came time for the big summer trip to an amusement park, suddenly me and another JR counselor were saddled with watching a group of 8 kids for the day with no adult. Everything went better than expected until the end of the day when we were trying to corral our group to leave. They didn't want to go, so they jumped in line for this sightseeing ride and got on before we could stop them. It was basically a slowly rotating observation room that went up a tall tower, stopped a while, then came back down. It got stuck halfway back down while we were frantically trying to find a real adult to let them know what happened. This was before cell phones were common. So I waited at the ride while my co-JR counselor went to find someone from our group. It kept us from leaving for an additional half hour to an hour while they got it unstuck. The counselors got in trouble for letting 2 13-year-olds escort a group alone. And I stopped going to the camp a week later because the other counselors started bullying me in retaliation. I'm a student, but at our school trip 2 teachers had an affair. People found out 2 years later and they're still going strong, lol. Another teacher mysteriously birthed a child 9 months after another school trip with my sister's class. The father was another teacher that was on the trip as well. I live in a small town, and rumors travel fast. This happened just the other week. We had left the school about 5 minutes before on the bus, when a student got my attention and said, "Miss, someone hit a girl in the head with a bottle and she's crying. I think here we go," and head down the back to settle them down. I get there. Students all looking on and crowding on. And sure enough, the girl is in tears and is holding her hand against her head. I ask, "Are you okay?" And she pulled her hand away from her head and it was gushing blood. We turned the bus around and she ended up going to hospital. Long story short, head wounds bleed a lot. 12-year-olds make bad decisions. And everyone was okay in the end. Can't say I felt overly prepared for that though. Obligatory, not a teacher. But when my econ class went to Nick for a field trip, one of my classmates tried to buy weed off a guy in an alleyway. Turned out to be an undercover cop. We were the honors class. He was a cool kid. I was walking to school in freezing weather one day and he offered me a ride. Don't remember what happened to him after that. I know he didn't graduate with us that year. You would think an undercover cop would have bigger fish to fry than a high school kid trying to buy weed. Why would he blow his cover over a thing like that? At an apple orchard with young preschoolers, one kid, who was always an issue in some way or another, shit his pants fully and didn't say anything. I just happened to pass him and smelled it. There were no restrooms, just a porta potty. Had to stand him on the edge and try and get as much as the flattened turd out of his pants because there was no way he was going to sit in shitty-filled pants for the 30-minute drive back. I was gagging and the kid was doing everything but following my directions. At one point I thought he was going to fall into the hole. It was awful. When I was a kid, our bus broke down outside Baltimore and we were there for like 3 hours. Okay. So not a teacher. But one time on a trip to the movies in 8th grade, one of the chaperones was my English teacher, who was deathly allergic to citrus. I think we know where this is going. On the bus ride back to school, a kid takes an orange, peels it and throws it at her. Hard enough to the point where orange juice got all over her shirt. Not sure if it was revenge related or just being a DCK. Anyway, she immediately starts having an allergic reaction and we have to pull over on the side of the highway and wait for an ambulance. We go back to school and the day is over. The school sends out an email basically saying please don't attempt to kill your teachers with allergic reactions and that she will be fine. Although, we had a substitute for 4 days and the kid got expelled. TLDR. Kid almost kills teacher with citrus allergy on the bus. Gets expelled. Not a teacher but a chaperone on a 6th grade trip. On the bus a pair of them all. Developed students proceeded to have a rather extensive makeout session. So I went back there and plunked my dad butt between them. They were not happy. The conversation about teen pregnancy avoidance was even more painful for them. My 15 years old stepsister was caught giving a guy a BJ on the bus back from their ski trip. Catholic school. They both got asked to leave. She moved to a local public high school and was known as BJ Girl. Side note. 2 years later my bio dad and stepmom split up. I'm back living with my mum. In a different town. 4 hours away. And a new kid starts at the school and he was telling the story of BJ Girl in our home ec class. Not a teacher. But I had a friend on this school trip. One kid had to go to the bathroom while they were trying to get to medieval times. They had to stop 3 buses for one kid to relieve himself. The closest bathroom was in the gas station right next to a strip club. Everybody was in 8th grade. Went to a new school camp which featured a night walk. We got sent out with no map onto a very poorly marked trail. A large gap opened up and one teacher wound up with 55 of the students panicking around her while the 3 other adults had about 15 students with them. Eventually we made it back to camp with the right number of kids. Not sure if they were all the same ones though. I remember a story of my former religious education teacher. Don't know if it's the worst but definitely funny. She naively went on a trip to Amsterdam with the graduation class. They told her it was because of the Anne Frank Museum and she believed it, which is pretty cute. The hotel, especially stairs and elevator, was plastered with the end of joints. Well, the 2 teachers spent their evenings with the attempt to kick the ends into the gap between elevator and door so the students at least wouldn't try to smoke that. Not a teacher. But I've got one from my college days. And X200B. Our history class had gone to see a Civil War battlefield. One of the trails my professor wanted to go on was blocked off by a wire fence and marked as unsafe. The professor just looked at a hole in the fence, looked back at the class, and said if they didn't want people going in, they wouldn't have left a convenient human-sized hole there, and led us all through. We walked down through the trail, had a good discussion and a couple pictures. But when we got back, a park ranger was there chewing out the teaching assistant who stayed by the bus. He let us go with a warning, but stalked us in a ranger vehicle the rest of the day. Not a teacher but I was a student. We went out ice skating. A 190-pound guy I sorta knew. He was in one of my classes. Didn't like him but I was too nice to tell him off. Was having trouble staying up and I was the closest person to him so he grabbed me and used me for stability. Only problem was he was putting all his weight on me and ended up pushing me down. Then because I was what was keeping him up, he fell and in the process stepped on top of my fingers and sliced 4 of them open. I really despise that guy. I'm okay but I still have the scars and a story to tell. Once took the Model UN Club out on a trip. All girls for some reason. The other teacher took the girls in while I waited outside for the stragglers. When I come into the building I see the whole group walk in the door and catch up with them. Turns out that door was the entrance to the girls' bathroom. I'm a guy. Managed to stop myself about a foot in when I realized and avoided a major debacle lol. Once my boss fricked up and we got to the airport late and we missed our flight. So 40 kids and 7 adults and he refused to split our group up. We ended up having to stay an extra night. It was a nightmare since our bags made it and we didn't. Also had a student fall off the train platform and onto the tracks, breaking ribs and knocking herself out cold. She looked like a ragdoll going down and I felt helpless just trying to keep the other kids calm. She was okay eventually. Stroke. Not exactly a teacher, but I worked for a treatment program for kids with ADHD. We took a trip to the botanical gardens with kids who earned the field trip. Turns out one kid was afraid of butterflies and freaked out real bad. It was my own Europe trip in high school. London, Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam. 1. First night in London. Witnessing someone get their face slashed open by a broken bottle in a fight in Trafalgar Square. 2. Second day in London. Encountering a dead body, homeless person, in Piccadilly Circus. 3. First night in Paris. Our hostel was rather close to the red light district and as we walked past a strip club the bouncer outside grabbed a friend's arm and tried to yank her inside. 4. Second day in Paris. Some kids were begging in front of the Paris Opera House and when one guy wouldn't give a kid money, the kid punched the guy in the face and broke his nose. 5. Some of the kids went into a coffee shop in Amsterdam because we were allowed to wander by ourselves in each city. And when we landed in Atlanta, FedEx dogs alerted because the kids had traces of pot on the soles of their shoes. 6. In the Atlanta airport waiting for our flight to our home city. The lead teacher fell and broke her arm and busted up her face pretty badly. So when we got off the plane in our hometown, the parents were horrified to see our teacher being pushed down the concourse in a wheelchair, looking quite worse for wear. I had a child have a massive asthma attack after a visit to a farm and a cotton gin. I ended up giving her mouth to mouth on the side of the road and praying for an ambulance. She was fine after a couple breathing treatments and some steroids. Thank goodness. This was before cell phones were common and we had to use the call box on the side of the highway. 10/10 would not repeat. 5th grade field trip to a zoo. During a tour of the primate exhibits, a notoriously ill-behaved student hurls a stick down into the gorilla habitat and lands near an adult gorilla. Without hesitation, the now angry gorilla arms himself with the same stick and sends it back like a tomahawk to the boy with terrifying velocity and wildly impressive precision. The stick shatters around the boy's face and he goes down. Commotion ensues. More gorillas make an appearance and begin to scream at the group of horrified children. Zoo staff start piling in out of the woodwork to see what's going on. The orangutans on the other side of the trail have now got wind of the situation and have begun mobilizing to assist their gorilla comrades. It's a war on two fronts now. Gorilla and orangutans launch volleys of fesses and students scatter. Throughout the entire exhibit, all manner of primates begin their intimidating chatter and howling. An army of zoo staff has swarmed the primate exhibits and manages to stop War of the Planet of the Apes. 30 minutes later, the zoo has indefinitely banned the school from returning and the boy is on the way to the hospital for 5 stitches in his chin. When I was in the 2nd grade, we took a field trip to the forest preserve. For me, it was an awesome field trip. Being led by a guide through this cool hiking trail and learning things about nature was my kind of thing. About halfway through the hike, a few of us decide to take the fun way across a thick log over a little creek. This kid named Marcello was in front of me and he was goofing off a bit too much and slipped. He fell into the creek, but in the process smacked his face into the log. We helped get him out of the water and noticed that his mouth was bleeding profusely. When he smacked his face on that log, he got a stick about 2 inches long jammed up into his gums. It was pretty damn gnarly and the park ranger that was leading the hike called for an ambulance. I work with 18-21-year-old students with disabilities. We took the students on our annual canoe trip at the end of the year. It's typically like a 2-hour canoe ride through a chain of lakes, and this particular year didn't go so well. One of the students was aggressively yelling at other students to paddle harder. Another student got annoyed and turned around and started beating this student with his paddle. We had to get all the canoes, there were probably 7 of them, to shore to get these 2 students out because they were bludgeoning one another.